to take these last couple minutes. I want to go through Trump's tariffs because this is a big deal. Happened today, April 2nd. Okay. We talked about this with Bonson on the show last Tuesday.
And we talked to Rod Martin.
And Rod about this. So here's Trump. So the Trump had been saying April 2nd's a big day. I'm going to have tariffs come into effect April 2nd.
Yep.
And here's Trump talking about that.
So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be because we never charge anybody anything. But now we're going to charge.
So that's him starting to talk about the tariffs. Right. Here's the chart he was talking about. So bring up the chart he was talking about so you can kind of see the details there.
So European Union, 39%. We're going to slap a 20%.
Yep.
Vietnam does a 90% tariff.
That's crazy.
And we're going to do 46% against them.
Yep. Taiwan, Japan.
64 versus 32. Yep. Japan, those are the high ones. India.
Yep.
South Korea, all those are almost over 50%.
Now you'll see Israel on there, but Israel today announced that they're eliminating all tariffs against the U.S.
Right, which I think is Trump's play in all this.
Yeah. Yes.
I think everybody's, the idea, and that's what Rod Martin mentioned to us. He said, I think the goal is no tariffs.
Yeah,
but basically, we're going to play chicken with them a little bit.
Right.
And Israel has already said, okay.
We're
tariffs.
done.
We're dropping our tariffs, and I assume we're going to respond by dropping tariffs against Israel.
Yeah. All the criticisms are economical, but this is not an economical play.
Yeah,
this is a geopolitical play. Who's going to play ball with us?
Yeah, and free up.
So they are, and so Bonson on the show, he acknowledges that. He acknowledged there's a political play here. There's a political calculus, and at the same time, sort of in terms of raw economics. He used this analogy that I'm just going to keep using from now on, just because it's colorful and helpful.
It's helpful.
But it's like, so a foreign country's like, we're going to beat our people.
Yep.
And it's like America saying, fine, we're going to beat our people.
Yep.
And he says that's the math. The math is, because that's a tariff is a tax, and they're taxing their people on U.S. goods, and we're going to tax our people on whatever, Japanese, South Korean, Chinese goods.
Yep.
He says, so on the face of it, it's kind of dumb. Doesn't really make sense. However, he acknowledged, I know there's a political play here. Rod Martin also sort of pressed this into corners in a really helpful way. Again, if you missed the shows last week, David Bonson and Rod Martin were both on the show last week talking about tariffs. Both have really helpful shows. But Rod Martin pointed out, the fact of the matter is though that they need us way more than we need them. Yeah. That's just a fact that's got to play into this. Mm-hmm. And since they need us way more, and particularly they need us to buy their stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Way more than we need to buy their stuff.
Yeah, that's why China could never win a tariff war with us.
And so that's the chicken they're playing. And I that makes sense to me. It's, again, I really don't want to live in this world.
Right.
But I do think if it's a little bit of a siege war of sorts where we're saying, okay, we're going to survive without your stuff for a little while.
I think a siege war is a great image. Like if we move off of the beating people, right? So one country says that we're going to beat. So if we move off of that into, say, food, like resources, food, right? So one nation says we're going to starve our people, and we might say
we're not going to buy any of your stuff or not as much stuff.
Yeah, or just sticking with the image, one beats and the other beats. One starves his people, the other says, well, we're going to go to war, so now austerity, victory gardens.
Yes.
It may be some of the same effects, but a very different reason, and it's supposed to be temporary. I also think that even that is still a very I wouldn't want to live in that world forever either. Still economical. There's a whole other level of this, which is just there will be a sorting here of those countries that are willing to suffer ideologically to maintain a rough relationship with us financially because they want to have a bad relationship with us anyway.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So I think that here what we're seeing, this is among other things,
it's a sorting hat.
We'll sort, but not just sorting economically, like ideologically, this is going to be a sorting hat.
Right.
Now, There's
That's good. That's helpful.
Yeah, there's one other chart I want to bring up. Just go to the other chart. Skip Trump's other comments.
This one?
Yeah, this chart. What this is showing you
ranking
is
trade freedom.
Yes, the actual
Singapore.
trade freedom.
This chart seems like really good television.
So, well, this comes from a guy. Now, this comes from the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
So, the Heritage is usually pretty good at trying to put some sort of rating system together that's fair and not trying to, be unbalanced and everything. So, the Heritage came out with kind of this, the lack of trade barriers,
free trade ranking
based on probably a calculation of a number of things, not just, whatever your tariffs are.
It says at the bottom, trade freedom scores are based on a country's trade-weighted average tariff rate and an index of non-tariff barrier policies.
So non-tariff.
I'm just reading the fine print. I don't know what that means.
Might be like a fine, or might be like they wouldn't call it a tariff, but they would call it like, your ship needs to dock here, $5,000, something like that.
So United States is ranked 69th.
Yes, in that.
Yeah, on trade freedom index.
So David Bonson retweeted this,
Yeah.
and I thought it was just some good context to maybe bring in to kind of look at America. I would love to, kind of get into some details on all that, but this is from the Heritage Foundation.
Is that including today's tariffs?
No.
So let's just be prior to that.
Yeah.
So we probably dropped in rank as of today.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Because if we just cranked up a bunch of tariffs to go to war, do this tariff siege. I'm gonna start using that now. Tariff siege.
Nice.
We're in a tariff siege. We probably dropped ranking, but again, if the goal is a sorting. And it may all even out in the wash if a bunch of other countries imitate Israel, drop their tariffs, and we drop the tariffs against them, and then it's just sort of like selectively, in general, we're discouraging trade with whatever, North Korea or whichever one, whatever, because they hate us,
right?
And they're against us no matter what. Like, let's do our best not to do business there, or at least do less business there. It's going to cost more, but that's not going to be the case of all countries across the board.
Well, I'd also wonder, how many of these nations have access to coastal lands?
A lot of them do.
It looks like a lot of them do.
I do think that there is some reason to have this craft be think of it as a little suspect without really knowing how to read it well. I will point out that there are a ton of nations on here that operate primarily as intermediaries or traders, right?
Yes.
And then there are all these European countries. A bunch of them are in the EU. How does that get credited?
Right.
Because you could be Germany and have really low tariffs, but you don't worry about that because you control the EU. The EU has its own tariffs.
Does all the tariffs.
I don't know how it accounts for all that.
That's a really good question.